Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the Crunchy Talk. I'm Michela Di Carlo. I'm the founder and editor of crunchytaste.com. It's the first solely illustrated online magazine for sassy women over 40 and beyond. We want to celebrate midlife as a stage of life in which we probably find our true self. And we do believe that playful women don't get old. And I think it's time for us to portray the real crunchy side of midlife that is much more than menopausal, much more than gardening and baking. And so we are here today to highlight the talent and resources of middle-aged people who break boundaries and find their true calling later in life. We are not here to sell any formula, any powerful cream to get rid of your wrinkles. We don't coach you. We don't tell you how you should live your life. We want you just the way you are, perfectly imperfect middle-aged people, probably ready to press the reset button. And if in some ways we will be able to inspire you today, that means that our mission is being accomplished. So, first of all, let me say a massive thank you to Professor Emma Rees, who invited me to share my mission, resetting the meaning of midlife, and to Catherine Linton. It's such an honor for me to be part of this festival. So welcome, crunchy people. I like to call you like that. And thank you for being part of this project. So, as I said, we are on a mission to reset the meaning of middle age, and we want to show to the world that we are evolving rather than disappearing. However, to become who we are meant to be means to let go of who we once were. And nothing in nature stands still, so why do we insist, we must probably walk in the skin of who we really are, or we will always be looking for ways to prove our worthiness. So today, for me, it's quite exciting because I'm so glad to introduce you such a special bouquet of perennials. Yes, at midlife, now middle-aged people are called the new perennials because they are hardy, they adapt, evolve, and grow anew. So the thing is that we grow whole, not old. Jenny Ann, what do you think? I mean, Jenny Ann is an OBE, thank you for being part of this talk, and you are a trans awareness and equality campaigner. So I'm sure that you faced a lot of prejudice and challenges. In your opinion, is it midlife a time of awakening?
Yes, thank you. It is. It's a real time of awakening, and it's a time when people can forget almost their past and just be the people they really are. I have a nice saying, age is just the number of years the world has been enjoying your presence. So age is not what counts. It's all about being who you are and who you should be. For trans people, there is an imperative to become the person you are, and lots of people talk to us about being brave and courageous. We just see it as living the life we should have lived always. And one of the things that I'm so pleased is that people from my generation and those coming on have become the role models for the young people who now feel empowered to come out as young people as they always should have done.
Yeah, well, it is said that midlife is not a crisis, but an unraveling time, right?
Yes.
And for some people, that unraveling comes in the form of confronting their sexuality, that it might be different from the one they had been living all along.
Yes, it's about challenging your gender rather than sexuality. It's a very simple thing. Sexuality is about who you're attracted to.
Yeah.
Gender is about who you are.
The interesting thing, we were having a chat before. You were telling me about reverse menopause.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about it?
Well, when I started on hormones, I went through all the things that I imagine other women go through at the menopause, but I came out the other side feeling stronger and very much more me. So it was truly a rebirth, a re-emerging of the person that I always should have been.
Thank you. But you also told me that midlife for you was a moment in which you rediscovered your own spirituality.
Yes, I was very lucky that I was brought up in a church that didn't want to know about people who are trans. And then a friend of mine introduced me to a church that had an LGBT congregation. And I went from being concerned about not being me in God's presence to being told I'd been created this way so that I could help other people to be themselves. And that was a real eye-opening moment for me. And I feel very privileged now to be able to help other people to be themselves.
Thank you. Emma Rees, I'm sure everyone here knows who is she, director of the university's Institute of Gender Studies. So, how does it feel to cross a line and leave your youth behind? A challenge, a relief, a liberation?
I'm not sure that I've really left anything behind. I think I got to the point where I realised that to be a sort of authentic to yourself is to be very messy, to be contradictory, to get stuff wrong, and to kind of learn from those mistakes and those contradictions. And it's been a process of evolution rather than change. And I look back on the teenager I was and the woman I was in my 20s and 30s, and I can actually see a lot of continuities. The difference is I don't give so much of a shit about what other people think about me. I am a very angry person in terms of injustice. I am very, very privileged in that I have a secure job and a platform, and I'm able-bodied, and I have white privilege and all of those things. And it means that I can call out things that I see as unjust or things that I see as needing to be brought to light. And that is a great delight. I mind far less now about who I irritate than I ever did.
And do you notice any common denominator between the feminist movement and the contemporary awareness of ageism?
I do. I think there are two issues there. The first is that feminism is broken at the moment, and there are a couple of issues that are particularly fracturing feminism that need to be addressed. And the other is that a common way of thinking about feminism, as I'm sure many people know, is to think about the waves. And the different waves of feminism suggest that there's a surpassing, an overtaking of previous ideas and movements by subsequent ones. And the problem with that is that it's quite often seen as generational. So women of my age, our mothers were second wave feminists in the late 60s and early 70s. And I think are sometimes disregarded by third or fourth wave feminists who think, well, what can they possibly know about the modern world? What can they teach us? But actually it's about an accrual. It's about a kind of building on the ideas of feminism that had come before. The issues that are dividing feminism are issues around trans identities and trans rights, and also around sex workers and sex workers' rights. And I'm horrified by some of the bigotry and hatred that is going under the name of feminism at the moment. And I feel like that's my current battle, is to kind of reclaim feminism from some very pernicious forces.
So race and gender, we know, are fixed at birth, but everyone ages, right? So how else is ageism different from racism and sexism?
Well, gender isn't fixed from birth, of course. I think gender is much more fluid, and I do think that we, in the global north particularly, are beginning to understand how that works. Yes. The inevitability of age is hard. I think that's why authenticity to oneself is so important. You don't get to be in your late 40s, early 50s without having had many losses and many pains along the way. And I think that for each of those losses, you have to keep living until you start feeling alive when you've had a bereavement. And that new alive you at the end of that process is one that has far more perhaps than she did before that loss. So the losses, in a curious kind of way, become part of us. They form and shape our identities. And that's the inevitability that I think many people struggle with. There is also this notion of the sort of invisibility of the middle-aged woman. And that's also difficult because we live in a culture that places so much value on youth and vitality. And that is something that I think many women struggle with. That's not something that I see as being at odds with my feminism, because my feminism is structural, it's systemic. I honestly don't care if somebody elects to have cosmetic procedures or wears makeup or wears heels. That's not what feminism's concerned about. That's not where the real battles are.
I've noticed that when we grow older, I don't know, probably we are more able to embrace a kind of sisterhood. When we are younger, I don't know, it looks like we are all in competition. It looks like we understand our, battles, and probably we understand now more than before, all of our badges of wrinkles and the scars. I don't know. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, and I think that sisterhood is an idea that, again, can kind of be put into the sort of, it can be dismissed as being just something that was sort of from the 60s around with consciousness raising, etc. But actually we have a huge amount to learn from those groups, from ideas of women coming together, and from the power that people with shared experiences, shared frustrations can have when they come together. It is a cliche, and it's to kind of evoke the spirit of Jo Cox, but we are stronger together, and we do have more in common than not. And so those skills of empathy and partnership and working together are incredibly important, especially in a geopolitical climate that's about division and enmity.
Absolutely. Lou Taylor, leading expert in aging, I would say. What conflicting thoughts did you battle while approaching midlife?
That's not an easy question to answer, is it? Conflicting thoughts as you approach midlife, because it's here, it arrives, and as Emma said, that younger self has travelled with you. I haven't left that younger self behind. That younger self is still part and parcel of me. I think the lessons that you learn are really important. I couldn't be that 18-year-old self now, because I would have self-destructed long ago. That angry kid that, had got so much energy and such a bad temper and was such a perfectionist. You've got to learn to adapt. I think you've got to learn to adapt in order to thrive. You don't just want to survive, you absolutely want to thrive. So you've got to really learn to read yourself. And in learning to read yourself, you've got to accept yourself, as we would say at home, warts and all. So all my flaws I've got to accept. And as Emma says, really, do you know what? I'm not too bothered what anybody else might worry or think about in terms of my flaws. this is what I bring to the table, this is who I am, and this is what I've got to offer. So I think for me, it's just that I've learned a lot more about myself. I've certainly learned to compromise. And one of the biggest things I've learned to do, a couple of things I've learned to do as I've got older is, one, I've learned to say sorry when I'm wrong. And two, I've learned not to be such a perfectionist. And yesterday I also mentioned learning to ask for help as I've grown older. So I think some key lessons for me that being, how do you leave that multitasking, still multitasking, but how do you leave that absolute drive for independence and I can manage it all? Actually, it's okay to say, I can't. I just can't. And actually, I don't want to. I don't want to. So.
And talking about the importance of challenging stereotypes, especially at this age, contrary to common myths, can I say myths?
Myths,
Sex isn't just for the young,
Oh, no.
right? And many seniors continue to enjoy their sexuality.
Yeah.
And according to your experience, why is sexuality in a mature age still considered almost a taboo?
A taboo. Again, Emma's already hinted at this, in that, you know, there's a huge myth, isn't there, a huge misconception that sex is only for the young, and we've got to overcome that. Sex is only for the beautiful, we've got to overcome that. And sex is only for the most perfect. We've really got to be able to challenge that as well. Men and women, we've all got to be able to challenge that. You know, a healthy sexual, intimate partner relationship, whatever that may be, or for those without partners, engaging in, let's get the words out there, engaging in masturbation or having some kind of satisfying sexual life is actually really important for people's health and well-being. So it's really important that as we grow older, we challenge these myths about what is sex, what is a healthy sexual relationship, how does that happen. The only problem is we're all staying a bit too quiet about it and nobody's out there talking about it. So we have got to really challenge and bust the myths that this is absolutely not the domain of our younger folks out there.
But what happens to intimacy, as people age?
Well, theoretically, nothing should happen to intimacy as people age. You know, the evidence would suggest that intimacy is going to remain. There are some inherent difficulties as people maybe lose a life partner or lose a partner. That may change a situation. But we've got, and it's going to be different cohort after cohort after cohort. There's also no evidence to say that those individuals with long-term conditions should not enjoy some sort of an active and satisfying intimate relationship. It's about what does that relationship mean to you. It might just require a bit of adaptation and a bit of change, but it doesn't mean to say that you still shouldn't be engaged in whatever is an intimate relationship, defined on your terms in the way that you want it to be.
So is it time to enjoying sex?
Unapologetically, the evidence would suggest that, particularly for us baby boomers, if you've got an empty nest, if you're in a yeah, it's as terrible as that is, you know, theoretically, we should have more time. So, you know, let's get out of the kitchen, or unless that's a place that you want to be having an intimate relationship, that's entirely up to you. But I guess I would argue from my own personal experience now, not just what the evidence says. Sometimes it takes a bit more time and a bit more planning, because I think as I've aged, it's all too easy to say, actually, the kids or those sort of duties or those other things, you very quickly fill that void with, I need to do the dusting, or I need to do, actually you don't. You know, maybe you need to invest in yourself, and part of that investment in yourself is investing in that intimate partner or that intimate relationship, whatever that means to you. So I think it's redefining what that means, but theoretically you would argue, the evidence would suggest, with an empty nest, with us growing older, we should have more time, and for those that create that, they are having better sex and better relationships. So we've got to get out there and be challenging it.
Thank you. Michael Jepson, So you are an artist, let's say that,
Yes.
and also a trans awareness and equality campaigner. And since your transition, you told me that you have been quite busy as a love coach for both genders. Can you tell us more?
I wouldn't say it's a sort of a love coach relationship. It's more like I've got an understanding of both sides of the gender sort of differences that sometimes happen. Certainly within relationships, when I've often had people come up to me as male people have said, I don't really understand what I'm supposed to do. I'm always in trouble. I'm being nagged at home and stuff. And then you go, well, I'm sure that's not the case. And then if the woman comes up and she'll say, well, he never listens to me, he never does anything I tell him, and I told him last month, and he's still doing the same thing and again that he did before. And it's sort of like having that impartiality about it, because I was socialised as a female, and now, but I've always felt male. So I've sort of got that understanding sometimes, a little bit of like an observer type role, where I can see both sides of why this is happening, this communication thing, because it tends to be communication that seems to be the key to it. It's not, that we're fundamentally so different. It's just that we talk a slightly different language sometimes, or we have a different set of priorities, or a different, list that we're working to. And that's what sort of sends the problems, out there, really. So it's just sometimes having that thing about listening to both sides and saying, well, I can see your point of view and I can see your point of view, and how can we meet in the middle and solve this, or find ways around that. And I think sometimes we expect other people to mind read us and understand what we expect of them, or what they should be doing, and they actually don't know. So I think that's where I've sort of had a unique viewpoint, really. So.
But in your opinion, why middle-aged people experience more, problem in their dating and relationship? Why it's tougher when we grow older?
Yeah, I think from what I experience and what I've seen is that people just tend to get sort of complacent about their partnerships, or they get insecure as well, especially, if people, usually stereotyping used to be males that had this sort of like midlife crisis, and they'd go off and buy a sports car and go and do all sorts of strange things, and maybe look at younger women. And I think sometimes when people start to feel insecure about the way they look, or they're not that young person anymore. If I did have someone who had this problem where they didn't like their husband looking at someone else, as they walk past in a restaurant, they'd get really upset about that. And actually, it was because they were insecure about how they felt about themselves, less to do with what he was thinking. Because, when I actually sat him down and said, are you thinking of going with this other person? He said, of course not. I love this person that I'm with. So, it's often that we project onto whatever else. So, I think that's what it is.
For you in particular, what are the positives of midlife, and what are the challenges?
Positives. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't.
Because according to several research, there are a lot of people who probably in their 40s or in their 50s, more in their 50s, are able to do a sorts of coming out, so they feel stronger. They don't care what other people think. So
that's definitely part of it. I think the part is that you stop caring, like everyone said, you stop caring about what other people think. There's less that peer pressure about, fitting into what other people expect you to be. You can become yourself. And so, but the knowledge you've got, the experience you've got, the life experiences you've had, and like the bereavement and those kinds of things, it all builds you as a person. It builds those structures that you become you and part of your character. And so you're better able then to see life as a whole, rather than just this little section. You just see it as a whole thing. And so I think I'm glad where I'm at. I've got this really strange thing going on at the moment. I'm taking hormones. So technically I'm an adolescent boy, which brings about all sorts of different problems.
Yes.
So, I've got sort of this, middle-aged body that I don't actually believe is middle-aged, because in my head, you know, I'm a youngster running around, you know, doing all those things that I should have done when I was 15, so I don't look 15. So, you know, that's been an interesting thing for me, and that's brought a lot of things home to me about, you know, how young boys go through the growing up stage and what's expected of them, certainly in society, and you know, being male you're expected to be a certain thing, and you know, we are all put into boxes, and so it's, you know, it's quite interesting to fight that, to say, you know, look, you can't put me in a box because I'm a person and I'm a human being and I've got my own thoughts and my own feelings, and it's okay to feel like that and to be strong about it.
You said that you have experienced a sort of a new renaissance, finding new purpose, enjoying in arts making.
Yeah.
And are these some of the advantages of aging playfully?
Yeah. I'm doing at the moment, I'm starting doing mandalas and art, you know, colouring and things like that. And I'm getting people back into it that sort of did it when they were children, and they really enjoyed that sort of like focused, without any issues and problems, and, you know, just that playfulness. And then they grew up and someone said, stop doing that, you're not allowed to do that anymore, you've got to go and be an adult and do all these things. And now they're coming back to it. A lot of people are crafting, and a lot of people are making cards and drawing and colouring, and it's so, you know, the freedom of it is so amazing, because it's not about showing it to your mum and putting it on the fridge door anymore or putting it in a frame. You know, this is doing it for you, for your peace of mind and for your stress relief, and that's what I'm really interested in now at the moment, is how that impacts on people's mental health, because, you know, you might be worried about the gas bill or worried about whatever, but once you start drawing or painting or creating, all those worries go, because you focus on something else. So, and of course you've got the time,
Yeah.
and you've got the money usually as well,
Yeah.
and you haven't got all those other distractions of the children and everything else. So it's your time to do what you want to do.
Thank you. And Vanessa is an HR guru, I would say, yes. And thank you, Emma. And what conflicting thoughts did you battle while approaching midlife in your case?
Well, can you hear me? So it's really interesting, isn't it? I was listening to everybody's perception of middle age and midlife, because one of the things that I was conflicted by when I was younger, I was just in such a rush, and I think I had this vision of what it would look like when I got a job, when I was going to be married, when I had children. And for me, I defined myself and other people in boxes around, you know, we're all there, we're all at that stage of life. And I recognised myself in other people and defined myself by other people and how their children were behaving, how mine were behaving, what job I had, whether I went to IKEA on a Saturday, and all the things that you defined yourself by. And then I suddenly stopped because my situation changed and my marriage ended, and the definitions all changed around me, but yet I still had 2 children who I needed to support and think about every day, and I realised I had to take stock. And so for me, the conflict was about redefining and stopping the rush. I just felt like if I just slowed down a bit and took stock. And I think that, for me, really helped, because when you're conflicted, when you're in a situation where you're unsettled and you're unhappy, you don't know how to define yourself and what you're trying to achieve. And then when you stop, take stock, maybe do something that's very good for your therapy. I went to a creative writing course. I did lots of different things that I had put off and I hadn't thought about doing, because it was just me. And when I didn't have my children because they were with their father, I had time for me again. I started to define what I was about. So it was great, actually. And I think in my 40s, those years really defined what I have become, and I've kind of forgiven myself and stopped rushing at things. Yeah. But I think I wouldn't go back and say, like you said, wouldn't change anything. I think I was just rushing headlong into what I now become. It just felt at the time like I was never going to be complete for me, and I think that's what I would say. The conflict was there around that completeness, and I just feel much more settled and happy now.
And then you bloom, because at the age of 50, you dare to set up your own business. My God.
Yeah.
Tell me, how did it happen?
Well, again, really, it was a moment of time when I thought, if I don't do it now, so I was approaching 30-year anniversary, effectively, of the career that I'd worked hard to achieve. And it was that time where I thought, well, if I don't do this now, if it's not going to be me that does this, then who's going to do it? I've got to make that decision. And also, the time was right. So, in a way, that finding myself and that settling down and thinking, right, okay, this is what I can do now. But also, because of the age I'm at and because of the experiences I've had, like you were saying about, all the things you go through, and certainly the way that you can put things back into perspective for people and help them to define the problem in a different way, I thought I can do that. So I made the decision to go by myself and to work with other people other than the team that I was in at the time.
But what has been the biggest challenge for you?
So I think when you are working for yourself, I don't know if anybody else is working for themselves in the room. I think, so there is only me. So when I get up in the morning, I don't go to work in a structured way like I used to. I used to get up in the morning, get in the car very early, head off to where I was going, and define my day by what hit me when I got there, really. So for me, what's difficult about it is that I am the only marketeer, sales, finance, everything. I do everything about my business. I created my business. I created the identity for it. I created the logo, the image of what I wanted it to be like. And sometimes that gives me an awful lot of pressure, because if I can't do something, I have to give myself the time to do it properly. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not really good at sort of going out and selling myself. So I thought I have to work harder at this. I think when we spoke, I was sort of trying to define what my offer was, and then I stopped trying to define it and thought, no, it's okay. It's just me. So that's been a challenge, but the benefits has been not losing sleep on a Sunday night anymore, which I just did for a long time. So on a Monday morning, we used to have a meeting. I don't know why. If anybody's got the opportunity to change structures, Monday morning meetings, it's a nightmare, because you spend all day trying to email people to find out if you've got the right information, because you don't want to get caught out on that Monday morning when you haven't got all the information. And that compression of my energy on a Sunday meant that I couldn't give anything to anybody else on a Sunday. So I stopped enjoying weekends, and that's not right either. So for me, the challenge is there, but the benefits are greatly outnumbering the challenges at the moment.
And do you have any tips for a midlife entrepreneur?
Well, I think I work by myself, but I do network as well, and I've connected with some really amazing people over the last year, purposefully connected with them, made opportunities to catch up with people, connect with my contacts from the past as well. So for an entrepreneur like me, who relies on, so I don't have a product as such, it's me that I'm selling in terms of the service and the knowledge and the skills that I have acquired, I think connect well, keep in touch, make yourself go out and find out new opportunities, and it's not going to come to you. You have to kind of want it and do it yourself, really. So the tip would be, to do that. But also, I think we've said this already, and I've probably already said it as well, but it's really important to watch your inner dialogue. So when you think you can't do something, you're the only person that's listening to that. So don't say it, because you can. So reframe your message to yourself, and then that helps you as an entrepreneur, because you're going out and selling that very positive message, rather than I can't do this, because you can. So, and I'm a believer in that. If you change that message internally, it will have a massive impact on how you come across to people.
And talking about ageism, have you ever experienced something like that?
Yeah, I did, and I think that it's really weird because when I, some people I know in the audience, I have to be careful what I say now. So when I got divorced, I was 42, and I didn't expect that to happen. And at 42, I had to define me as 42 with two boys. One was 10 and one was 12 at the time. And I thought I wouldn't ever experience my life in the same way. Nobody will ever want to be with me. And how will I find my life after this time? And I define myself by my age. I'm 42, I've got 2 children, and I kept doing that, and I kept talking about that. And people said, Vanessa, stop doing that. Stop telling people you're 42. It doesn't matter, you know. And I was like, yeah, but I'm 40. And I kept saying it. And I'm 54 this year, and I've stopped saying it because it doesn't matter anymore. But at the time, it defined me, and I think that's what we mustn't do. We mustn't define ourselves by our age and how we represent that age. So
it's quite difficult to close the age gap in a workplace.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you have any advice for making a more inclusive, age-inclusive workplace?
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
I definitely think. I mean,
because it's becoming such an issue
it
nowadays.
is.
You know, there are people from all ages trying to working together, but sometimes it's not so easy, and you could end up to have a boss that is younger than you.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what would you suggest? Because I know that now that you have your own business, you work with several, business and companies, and you try to help them, especially in this transition.
I think so what I try and do, so the phrase we use now is multi-generational teams, and we try and encourage people to think about all the generations that may work together. And you're absolutely right, you can end up managing a team who are very much younger than you, or you could end up being managed by somebody very much younger than you, and that's just the reality of the life that we're in at the moment. And it has always been there, so it's not a new thing. It's just that we're much more aware of it now because we're much more aware of everything, and rightly so, absolutely. I think it's about the team itself and the dynamics within the team, and the what we talked about earlier, and what you were saying about listening to people. So for me, it's about understanding where people are coming from, listening to them, what do they need right now in their career. So whatever age they're at, what can you do if you're the line manager of that team, or if you're in that team, what do we all need from each other, respecting each other, finding out about each other in terms of what people want and like doing, and spending time with them. But more importantly, what hit me quite, because I came from a background where, so the last 14 years or so I've worked in education, and one of the things that I seem to spend a lot of my time doing latterly in my job within the HR function was supporting teachers as they got through performance management, which seemed to become a thing that was happening in the age of sort of 50 plus, because the confidence had gone, and then people would start describing them by labels, and then and it became a thing. And I was like, why? How come this is becoming a statistic? And this organisation seems to be really bad at managing the transition between people in their 50s who are trying to relearn new skills, trying to engage with young learners, and so my work then, in the last 2 years of my time, was really about promoting the support we needed to give to people as they aged and as they got more, as their confidence and things like that became more of an issue for them. So I think we have to take account of it, that the organisations now have to have support policies and training, particularly training on how to deal with teams and when they work together, and how best to help them. So
thank you. And Theresa Roberts, you are a humorist, a motivational speaker, and looks like you recently joined this university because you're studying for your PhD. Wow. You should know that Theresa has a 3% side, but 97% of attitude. And she's also a runner, and she plays cricket. Tell me, how can you manage all those things all together? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I don't want to go out, I don't want to do my jogging, and I look at you, you're incredible. I mean, is midlife for you a time of, I don't know, awakening, renaissance? I don't know.
It is. I have to say, it sneaked up on me, and I couldn't see it coming at all. But during this time, there's so many benefits to have. I always say to people, I do not have children or a family to look after, so I do have extra time. But frankly, even the most successful people in the world have 24 hours a day. So it's all on how you use it, but I think it starts with a vocabulary that we use, because you wake up in the morning and you have to go to work. No, you get to go to work. You wake up in the morning, you have to take the kids to school. No, you get to have a kid that you can take to school. Change the vocab inside your head, and all of a sudden you will find that time becomes more your friend.
That's good. I suppose that, you know, studying at university might be sometimes quite hard. So I wonder what university is like when your eyes don't work well and you are over 40. So it's quite tough to go back to the uni, you know, when you are 40 or 50.
I know, but it does help if you can't see what the students' expressions are when they look at you. It is hard, but like anything else, it's got its benefits, because the industry that I worked in, I've been in for many years, so I can bring that experience and actually work on something I know well and I'm very passionate about. Yeah. So it all brings different bits, and it's not that difficult anymore going to bed at 9 o'clock at night.
Well, that's it. Yeah. How do different priorities impact our view of education at this age?
Sorry, just say again?
How do different priorities impact our view of education at this age? I mean, you have a different perspective, I'm sure, you know, now, when you were in your 20s or 30s, so your approach probably is a bit different. So the advantages of being middle-aged, going back to uni and study again, do you think that a wider experience might be helpful?
I believe it does, but I believe that your biggest stumbling block is the actual decision to go and do it. School leavers go to university, not people in their 40s, 50s and 60s. But actually, yes, you can, because it's a time of change. And I honestly believe if you really, really want something, there is always a possibility. You cannot dream it and it's not possible. For me, example, I want to be a pilot. And a lot of people have a problem with that. My problem is not actually with being able to fly the plane. I'm still struggling with how I'm going to get to convince people to join me on the flight.
But tell me, you are a body activist. I mean, you try to help us, you know, making peace with our body, right? And you also do a lot of sports. And I don't know, how do you play cricket? I mean, do you think that it's helpful for your mindset, for your well-being? I mean, especially when you have to, you know, to challenge so many things.
Yes, a lot of us know ourselves a lot better when we get to middle age, but one of the things we might have learned is that we have the challenge of mental health issues. And if I don't go out, if I'm not active, I'm in trouble. That's as simple as it is. Being outside is not always easy, and being active is not always easy, but it always has a good result. What sport has shown to me again is that anything is possible. You just need to decide to change it. So it doesn't mean you stop doing things. You just start doing it differently. For example, this is why I can play cricket. This is why I can hit a really, really good cover drive for any one of you that might know cricket. And I'm a bowler as well. And yes, I swing both ways in cricket.
Tell me, Teresa, and for you, what are the positive sides of midlife?
Oh, haven't we heard so many? Number one, you can become successful. You don't give a shit what anyone says anymore. You have lots of sex. Yes. So, after today, I knew I had a few things that I knew, but it's like, yeah, I'm going to do my homework, don't you worry. But it is true that we have a right to be more confident. You've got experience. Don't let age tell you that you're now worth less or you can only do less. That's not true. That's not true. But in the end, the one that's going to make the choice between whether you can or whether you can't is going to be you.
Thank you. So, for you in particular, midlife,
Yeah.
okay, you face a lot of challenges, but there are also positives, things.
Yes.
And you mentoring in some ways a lot of young people. Can you tell us more? What do you do in your trans nest?
Yes.
Because you establish a lovely school in some ways. Yes.
Yes, we have in North Wales, we have a trans community house where we support people who can't be themselves at home, people who want to try out living full time as their real gender before they go and tell everybody, because if you're not ready, you can't untell it. So make sure it's right for you. We also support people after surgery, and we have lots of very nice things, like we have an annual garden party that lots of people from our community come to. But I think you're referring more to the work we do in the schools. Yeah. I belong to a group called Diversity Role Models that go in the schools to teach the young people not to be homophobic, biphobic or transphobic, and to have a little better understanding of what different sexual orientation or a different gender identity really means. And it's great because the kids in the main, if I can call young people kids anymore, the young people just get it. There's no side to it. It's just, okay, we understand that. Can we go and play football now? It's just not an issue, and yet so often people who are trans are told, if you become yourself, you'll upset the children. In the main, children understand almost better than adults. They haven't taught yet, and it's one of the things I learnt as a middle-aged person, they haven't learned to be discriminatory yet. And somebody else teaches them. Too often it's us, when we should be teaching them to be really, really positive. And I do want to say again, the great thing with young people is they can get on with their lives, and they can, if they want to be out as gay or lesbian or trans or non-binary or genderqueer, however they want to define themselves, they don't cause all that collateral damage that people like myself who came out in later life did. So many of the people I care about were very disappointed when I transitioned. If they'd known me as Jenny Ann from the start, there wouldn't have been that problem.
You also share with me a lot of things that happen in your life, in your midlife. You became a mother. Can you tell me more?
Yes. When my children were born, I was very involved in the childcare. I was lucky enough and at the time, most people didn't have both parents at the birth, but I was there for both my children. But when I transitioned, my children decided they didn't want to talk to me.
Sorry, how old
How
were you
old was when I transitioned? Well, I transitioned at about 3 or 4 years old in my head.
Yeah.
But to actually transition, I had to wait till my children grew up and until we'd looked after my parents in their later life. So I finally transitioned when I was 60, which is quite late in midlife, although today's 60 is yesteryear's 40.
Never too late to celebrate.
It isn't. But what I find very pleasing is you're right, we've supported a number of people to come out. Somebody I supported who was in prison and transitioning, and can you imagine how difficult it would be to do that? Came to stay with us when they were finally released, and they started calling me Mum. And I felt very good about that, but I said to them, look, you can't take me as your mother because you've got a perfectly good mother already. And she said to me, yes, anybody can be a mum, but it takes a special person anybody can be a mother, but it takes a special person to be a mum. Oh. And one or two of the people you look after call me Mum. And you'll laugh, my grandchildren call me Tranma.
Lovely, thank you.
Because they all have 3 grandmas.
Thank you. Emma, I did my homework, and it's quite challenging interviewing Emma Rees. Oh my God, I'm interviewing.
I am utterly intimidating.
Yeah. So I wrote a specific question. Okay. So, considering the growing awareness of ages and aging as a social construct, right? Mm-hmm. Could a deeper understanding of these dynamics be a catalyst for feminism, women's rights, and a new pact amongst female generations? You like it? Yeah?
It sounds like one of the essay titles. You're going to have to run that past me again. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, I have this strange accent, but you know what? I really feel at home, especially thanks to this festival, diversity festival. In some ways, I'm diverse too, So I'm over 40. I'm Italian. So considering the growing awareness of ageism, right, and aging as a social construct, right? Could a deeper understanding of these dynamics be a catalyst for feminism, women's rights, and a new pact amongst female generations?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, there's masses in there to unpick.
It was quite challenging, While I was preparing my questions, I thought, what I'm going to ask Emma Rees? Oh my God. She's lovely. I have to say that she's very welcoming. But, I don't know, I felt that I must ask a serious question to Emma Rees. So I hope this is serious enough for you.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think that there is a lot to be said for this notion of socialisation and the social construction of ageing. And I think we have to be very alert to the forces that sell particular ideas about ageing to us. Because, for example, the menopause has recently become much more talked about and much more visible, and that can only be a good thing. But I think that some of the motivation behind that is financial. It's driven by the markets. It's driven by a neoliberal culture that focuses on the individual rather than the collective. And if you can make people feel that they're not doing something properly and they need to buy products in order to do something properly, then you stand to make money out of them. And I do wonder whether, for all these wonderfully productive conversations that we are having, just as one example about the menopause, actually there is a sort of slightly more sinister motivation behind it. And I think it takes people like you, Michaela, to kind of say, well, we need to have a sort of authentic conversation about what middle age means. that operates outside of the people that are trying to sell us stuff to age in a particular way. I don't know, does that answer that question? No. Okay.
You can answer too, of course.
Yeah, please.
If you feel to. Please. Should I rephrase it?
It's not an easy question.
I know. That's why I work so hard. I wanted to look like a serious, journalist.
Well, trust me, it's going to be an essay title next semester, I think,
Wow.
isn't it? We've got a massive challenge on our hands, haven't we, to tackle ageing stereotypes. But, I'm a believer that we're only going to be able to do that by working intergenerationally. So we've got to put more energy into, I'm going to quote Willits here, OBE, who wrote a book on the pinch. We've got to be working across generations. It's about working with our young people. They're a huge social mass. How do we come together to create a society that's cohesive, that embraces not just older adults within that, but just embraces everybody regardless of age, gender, all the rest of it. There's huge work to be done. And, I live in a utopian world. I often say I'm beamed up at night to somewhere that isn't like this world. My world doesn't look like this. My world values everybody and everybody in it. So we've got to be doing more work, for me, intergenerationally to bust the kind of social norms. And part of that is about how do we establish a political movement that tackles our social policy, our politicians. There's massive amounts of work to be done because ageing is a social construct, and when it suits policymakers, they shift and change that. So when it suits policymakers to change, don't get me on state pension age, they change state pension age, don't they? So how do we, which creates problems for our younger people, how do we actually create a social movement that encompasses all to bring about change that's positive for everybody, of which ageism is a little bit within all of that.
Go, Emma, go. I think you're absolutely right, and I think ageing is political, because I think the personal is political. I admire and respect Teresa hugely, but I would change, for me, some of what you said around determination and resilience, perhaps, because I do think that there are all sorts of barriers, structural and systemic, that mean that no matter how hard some individuals try, they're never going to be given the opportunities that many of the rest of us are given. And again, it comes back to the idea of being sufficiently confident in middle age where you can point to those barriers. I'm very conscious that one of my research students is at the back of the room, and I quite often use the analogy of a fraying jumper or cardigan. Cardigan's more middle-aged, I think. And seeing the loose thread and saying, I wonder what happens if we tug on that. I wonder what will unravel. And actually so much of what is presented to us as natural, as the way things ought to be, are just constructs that through habit and tradition have become sort of hardened to the point where we accept them, when actually, if we interrogate them, if we are persistent, and I like the analogy of the naughty kid in the supermarket, and I think as a feminist, a lot of what I do is being a naughty kid in the supermarket and just saying why, but why, and actually eventually the whole thing kind of just frays, and you realise that there is a social construct rather than something natural there.
Wow. We should have called the Times. I don't know, Catherine. We should have called the Times. We have such a great news about it. Your opinion? Yes. Okay, joking. But Michael, you were experiencing also something joyful, playing with little stones. Can you tell us more? You I don't know. You were telling me about a new way of playing with the little stones, and it's something that especially middle-aged people enjoy. I don't know.
Yeah, I make little stones with little messages on, and it's messages that it's from my knowledge and my experience over the years. And I started writing these little pebbles that I sold at craft events, and I found that a lot of the sort of quite older people, maybe in the 70s and 80s, they'd come up and they'd read them intensely, because they're all different, and they'd say, "Oh, but I already know that." And I'd say, "Yes, but if you're 20, you don't know that." And they couldn't understand why someone would buy these stones. And the idea was, I found that people were coming and picking them up and saying, "Oh, that's exactly what I need to do, but I've not had the courage to do that." And suddenly a little stone tells them that it's okay to do it. And I sell them for £1, which it doesn't really matter how much I sell them for. The key is that they value them, and that it gives them sort of a little note like you would get from your parents to say you're allowed off PE or something. And it's sort of like, this is your permission to go and do whatever. But people stand there for hours going through them, because there's hundreds of them. And I can't actually remember what the messages are, there's that many. But they always go away and say, "Oh, that's just me, that's exactly me." Or they'll buy them for other people and say that's exactly what that person needs to do. But it's so important, I think, for us to listen to our own selves, because we know, I always believe that we actually know inside us what we need to be doing and what we should be doing and what's going to make us happy. But often we get influenced by everyone else and what we're expected to do and what we've always done. And so we do get sort of like pushed into this thing of, you can't change, you can't do what you want to do. And that sort of stifles us, and that makes us feel that we are stuck, we can't move on. It's always, I've got one here that says, no buts or maybes, or after the children have gone, or when I retire, or all those things that we always say, or when I'm feeling better, or when I've got more money, or or when my parents aren't here. All those things that we put in our way as barriers to our moving forward. And actually, if we just put our hand on our heart, we know exactly what we need to be doing. And that certainly for me is I write these stones, but for me that's what I had to do. I thought that I had all this pressure about what I should be, and what expectations of other people for me, and I just had to say, I'm going to risk everything on this, and I'm going to do what I need to do for me. And I think that's the most important thing you can actually say before it's too late. I always seem to think as well, people wait until they're sick, or they've had a health scare, or I don't know, some terrible disasters happened, and then they reevaluate their life. And I think we need to do it in advance of that, before it's too late. So the little rocks do help, and I encourage people to write their own, because, like I said, we do know, and it's just reminding ourselves to always be true to ourselves. Which is what I say. So.
Thank you. It's a way for you to smash, stereotypes. Your pebbles probably are a way to smash, those barriers amongst generation.
Yeah, I mean, generations, the kids love them. I've never known, a section that don't. And I've had the weird thing about communication we were saying before about people not communicating. I've had people come up and some of them say, "I need a hug," and they've picked it up and given it to their partner and said, "I need a hug," and they've actually had a hug. And it's sort of like, you have to have a pebble to tell you to say that to someone, and that other person needs a pebble to understand that message. So, it's a catalyst. That's all it is. A rock is a catalyst.
Thank you. So, Crunchy Tales, was born out of necessity and frustration, because, I couldn't find any magazine out there able to celebrate this new wave of midlife women. And especially I like the concept of aging playfully. So Michael expressed his own idea of aging playfully quite well. And for you, Emma?
Oh,
How
but
would you age playfully?
just as a footnote, the rather wonderful Caitlin Moran, and I'm sure many of you will have read her stuff, she says that one of the things she wishes she'd told her 20-year-old self that should go on a wee rock was dry clean only can actually go in the machine on a delicate cycle and it'll be fine. and I wish I'd told my 20-year-old self that as well. I think you do have to age playfully because, as Michael's intimated, it is just too short and we do put things off. And I think that's part of what I was saying earlier about learning from the losses and learning from the pain. And you know, as you say, Michael, you do hear about people who get some terrible diagnosis and who then reevaluate everything. Well, how about you do the reevaluation before the terrible diagnosis comes in, if you have that privilege to be able to do that? But I would still, because I think everything is political, and I would still say that it is very easy for somebody like me to be able to say that and practice that. For people in other circumstances with other obstacles and other barriers, that's far harder. You know, the mention of the pension age that Lou said, that those sort of things really matter. And there will be people working way beyond when they ought to be working in terms of their physical and psychological health, who can't be particularly playful. And I think it is about pointing to those inequalities, but at the same time, doing the things that matter to you. And being...
I know what you like. I know the way you age playfully.
I'm really worried about what she's going to say next.
Well, I know that you enjoy going to hard rock concerts, for instance.
I do, yeah, absolutely. But I gave up on festivals maybe about 5 years ago or so because it was just so much walking. And it was just so much queuing for terrible loos and terrible food. And... you know, I've been camping about twice in my life. There was no room service either time. It was awful. And I do. And that's quite interesting intergenerationally as well. You mentioned the empty nest syndrome earlier. And when our daughter left home, we were overjoyed because we could play our music really loudly and there wouldn't be anyone to complain in the way that she used to complain. But I do think that it is about, you know, it's about carpe diem. It's about seizing the moment. It's about making the best of what you've got. And it is about being ambitious and aspirational, but it's also about counting your blessings. I've got a friend who's in recovery, and she has a gratitude journal. And every night, apparently this is quite a common thing in recovery, she writes down 3 or 5 things that she's been grateful for that day. And she's been doing that for years. And it's just the loveliest thing, because even if you've had an awful day and everything has felt impossible and difficult and frustrating and you just want to weep, actually, you know, there are still 3 things that you can be immensely grateful for. We need to think globally as well. We need to remember that we can, just by virtue of being here right now, we have so much to be grateful for that many other people don't.
Thank you. And Theresa, what's your own way of aging playfully? Tell me.
That is where I have a saying, you turn your scars into stars.
Yeah.
You turn the bad things into humour. If you don't mind, I'm quickly going to show you. This is a pain. This is definitely not a fashion accessory. It is ugly, and I'm still waiting for them to invent one that's actually good looking. But I have to have it. So I make the most of it. I was out with a bunch of girls one night. We were just having drinks and we were on our way, waiting for our cabs outside, and it was a really nice evening until we got approached by this unshaven, badly dressed, smelling of beer, middle-aged British man, thinking, obviously he had a few pints, thinking he's got a chance. And my cane was lying on the table like that, and he came and he was like hanging over my shoulder, and in his beer-infused breath, he said to me, "Oh, love, do you play the drums?"
My word.
And I did this. no, this is my measuring stick. Do you live up to my expectations? Guess what? He disappeared.
And what's your own way of aging playfully? Sorry. No. I want to know exactly your own way. Okay, sex and?
For those of you that were there yesterday, you'll know I grew up in a tower block. So, and for those folks that know me really well, I'm not very good with the great outdoors. In fact, I don't like much that's green or grass or anything else because I've never had an amazing appreciation of it. But I've been really fortunate in the last 2 years to be a keeper of bees. So, in working with all those predominantly girls in the hive and of course the queen, you just get closer to nature in a way that you have to completely disengage from everything else. So in terms of taking time out and space out for me, and in a way that I can give back, working with my girls, I would say, being up the garden on my own, just me and them and the smoker. So, and it's something that I could never have dreamed of having ever doing. But in terms of being able to give back and, you know, just watch the abundance of stuff now grow into the garden, something I've never been appreciative of before, it's just brought a new lease of life, really. So I can zone out, only to a degree, because they'll have you. They will have you. But yeah, so yeah, getting back to nature, something I've never had.
Jenny Ann, for you? Michael, you already answered.
Well, I transitioned late in life, so one of the things of aging playfully was just to be me. But there are two things I want to bring to that. One is just because you change your gender, you don't forget all the things you enjoyed doing when you had to live as the person you're not. So I'm particularly interested in steam locomotives. So I travel around the world to see operating steam. And because I live in a nice area of North Wales, I'm very interested in the history of the area. And I've been, in the last 10 years, putting together a social history of the area I live in old postcards. Oh. And you can't imagine all the interesting things that come up. So, for instance, in the town where I live, in Drill, in Denbighshire, nobody would believe, but once to the town came Buffalo Bill with his circus to perform. And along all the towns in North Wales, I was accepted, and generally people were friendly. And then I found out that in the holiday towns, nearly all the theatres had female impersonators. And the ones in Rill were so successful, they bought the theatre with the money they made. So it's amazing what you can discover if you open your eyes and go down a completely different lane.
Thank you. And for you, Vanessa?
Thank you. Well, I think for me it's been quite different now that I work for myself, because I can be more playful. I can have more choice over what I do in terms of free time, which I didn't seem to have a lot of when I was working full-time in the jobs that I had before. But what I would say about aging playfully, and what I would say about my sort of take on it really, is bring it back into the workplace as well. I would say that because I'm HR, but clearly for me, it doesn't have to be about playful time when you're not in work. I think we should have the approach that in work we should have fun and we should have good times as well. You meet most of the people that will be your friends, you meet partners, you meet really good people, and so you should enjoy each other's company and have the playtime in work as well as when you're not there, because that makes it all a little bit more, makes it relatable, and you can be yourself. And one of the things that somebody said to me there was two things that people said to me when I was going through my change in terms of the way my life was going to be lived. One was spend your time and energy on people for whom you are indispensable, not for people for whom you are dispensable. Yeah. So when I left work and said, I'm going to spend some time with my children, and somebody in my workplace said, oh, how old are they? And I said 23 and 21. I genuinely meant it, because that was my playful time that I missed a little bit of. And also the other thing that somebody said to me, and it's becoming a thing that people are talking about a lot now, is to be your true self, bring your true self into everything you do, so take yourself with you. So for me, being playful is about being playful in my spirit and not just finding something, because it's not always easy to have a hobby or things when you are working a lot, but if you can enjoy the time that you have and make it playful. So I work with teams now in organisations around that, sort of engaging them into having more fun in the workplace, and people go, we're not here to have fun, Vanessa, we're here to work. And I'm like, yeah, but you'll work harder and you'll work better, and it'll be much better for you generally if you have fun while you're here. And eventually they come round to my way of thinking. So I think that's how I'm doing it. I'm getting my vicarious aging playfully out by the work that I do as well. So I'm chuffed with that.
Thank you, wonderful crunchy people. And is there anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question? Yes. No? Come on. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, because it's a cafe, it's not set up the best for the microphone, so I'll just have to do some running back and two.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I'm asking a question on the basis that there are no stupid questions. I do feel like I'm a little bit of an imposter here, because I was only booked on when I met Michaela through having nowhere to park when we were on the Women's Day thing. But I'm glad, very glad and appreciative that I've been here. I've just been reflecting, as you've been talking, on a couple of the messages. I think the messages on stones were a fantastic idea in terms of where we're going with mindfulness and things like that. I've also been interested in a few of the political messages. And I'm just wondering, for me, the concept of middle age seems to be as if it could be a bridge between where we have other bits of social. So, for example, we seem to have a lot of supportive groups for, Age UK for older people and children's with, support in school and things like that. So, I guess also, I'm making long wind of this, so sorry about that. But no, I've also thought about the concept. I've thought about the concept of being in the sandwich generation. Some of us have got older people to consider caring for, and children, I think, you just don't get rid of them, really. That's said in a really lovely way. They are always your children. You will always worry about them, and you will always worry about your parents. So with all that in mind, I guess I'm thinking or wondering whether there are any ways to make the most of this group, rather than suggesting that it's a crisis, suggesting that actually the concept of having climbed up that mountain and we're at the top, we are the ones that are actually pulling those people from below up to the top, and possibly stopping those people falling or going down too quickly when they are. And I've heard a few messages suggesting that it should be good in workplaces, although from private enterprise I know that they're mainly highly motivated to make profits. But I'm just wondering how we can roll such a thing out and have a few more groups. And on the back of that, before I let go of the mic, I'm sorry, I don't like the sound of my own voice, but it's just wanted to say just one more thing and ask Michaela whether there's more, whether you see as many issues or crises or insecurities in middle age, because I'm guessing in Europe I have a perception that there is more of an intergenerational working. I'm sorry, there's a million questions there, but I just wanted to throw a few things out.
Actually, we were hoping not to give you this impression of crisis. The whole, spirits was, to show that it's possible to find new purpose and joy in life. But in case of the workplaces, probably Vanessa is the best one to answer. Talking about.
Thank you. Yes, so I think the workplace is vital because we spend so much time in work. and if we're in work and we can't represent that spirit in work, then we really aren't doing a good job. So I talk a lot to people in senior management saying, you know, you're going to get the best out of people if they are engaged and happy in their work. And I've said that. But I think coming together as groups, so for example, finding a group within the workplace that you can talk to about how you're feeling, or so support groups set up within the workplace is a really good idea. I know there are groups within the university for specific types of things, and I think that helps people to know where to go to find, call it their tribe, if you like, or people that they can relate to. And I think the workplace should have those sort of groups, so LGBT groups, women's only groups, mentoring groups, support groups, anything that you want to give a title to it, but it should be there to foster and support people in the workplace to find their place. But I think outside of work, again, we will gravitate towards people who will be interested in something that you're interested in as well, if you take that opportunity. One of the things that, again, somebody said to me, a very important thing is don't turn things down, so say yes to things. You never know what you're going to engage in, so I joined a choir after Christmas because that seemed to be something that I was missing in my life, and it is working for me. So if you find something that will help you to overcome whatever it is, if it is a crisis or something that you need support in. But I think the workplace is a good place to try and find groups, set up groups and groups that will support other people if you can get engagement on that. But I don't know if other people want to.
I love that idea about saying yes, but something else that I would need to get better at is also saying no. Because I find people and projects infinitely fascinating. I will say yes to an awful lot of stuff, and actually I want to be able to say no more. But I think saying yes when it feels scary can be really rewarding, you know, because then you do things that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily have done or even contemplated doing, like joining a choir, which is frankly terrifying. It's just... But Michaela, you've been asking us an awful lot of questions, and so the tables are turning. I was really interested in what the questioner was saying about how what you're starting here could be part of a kind of movement, this idea about resetting middle age, about moving away from it as a time of crisis. I loved your analogy of the sort of mountaintop that middle-aged women are on. Often we can feel we're kind of underneath that mountain with all the stuff that goes on. But yes, we ought to celebrate reaching some kind of pinnacle. Is Crunchy Tales something that you see sort of growing in terms of a sort of franchise model, an unofficial franchise model? I mean, where would you like it to go?
Well, at the moment, we just launched this magazine. Actually, last year we launched this magazine. And we are growing, you know, from strength to strength. So it means that probably midlife, it's a hot topic. We are, at the moment, we are trying to export these talks all around Europe and even in the United States. And we already have scheduled a couple of dates, probably, you know, the second part of the year, because unfortunately, the coronavirus at the moment is delaying our plans. But yeah, it's growing. But more than a movement, I'm basically a lifestyle journalist, and you know, my aim is simply to write about what's happening. And what's happening is that women don't like being defined by a number anymore, in this case, age. And middle-aged women, but in general, middle-aged people are not like the one, you know, we were supposed to be. You know, think about, for instance, our grandma or our moms. You know, they were supposed to retire and, you know, gardening, baking, all these sorts of things. Nowadays, according to all the interviews that I've done, you know, with very inspiring women, including you, it looks like, you know, despite many people think that midlife is a crisis, it's not. It's true that there is a moment in which you don't know, oh my God, I mean, where I'm going to, you know, what I'm going to do, you know. But I think that it's important that you feel stuck in the middle of your journey for a moment, because it means that you probably needs to gather some energy, to get some energies, to reboot your life again. So, I mean, honestly, I was tired of this oral frumpiness the media, describe middle age. I think it's time to say it loud, we are not over the hill. So I hope that this positive approach will inspire other ladies to think about this stage of life like a very important moment in which you can really do whatever you want. But I don't mean that you have to succeed and you need to become the top of your top of the ladder. I think it's important to find your own space into this world. So what better time than midlife?
And I was really struck when Jenny Ann talked about how 60 is the new 40, because I think about my grandmother and photographs of my paternal grandmother. And actually, as a child, she was an old lady, and then you think about it and think, gosh, actually, she really wasn't very old at all. But she looked like an old lady the whole time. Yeah. There's nobody in this room right now who looks like an old lady, because somehow we've been able to kind of throw off those shackles of what we ought to look like. Yeah. And of course, it's far more than appearance. But that does matter. I can remember a great aunt, and I don't remember her wearing anything other than a sort of overall with handy pockets in that she had no end of exciting things in. And that was kind of like, I thought, well, clearly when you get to really old, like 25, clearly it's going to be overalls from then on. And it was quite a relief, actually, to find out it wasn't. Tell us a bit, Michaela, for people who don't know, about the crunchiness of Crunchy Tales. How did that name come to you?
Well, crunchy conversation are those that have the potential to make us feel a bit uncomfortable, take a menopause or midlife crisis. But crunchy means also something crispy, something that make a sharp noise, and that's what we want to do through our illustrated stories, making some noises, so create a bit more of awareness,
So kind of like celery that's fresh and you can put Philadelphia on, rather than celery that's been in the fridge for 4 weeks.
Yeah, something, that makes some noises. Yeah, I like the analogy. Yeah. A crisp. I like the idea of being, a crispy crisp. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Hi, I was just wondering, we've talked a lot about changing your attitude and doing different things. And back to something you said earlier about the political situation and women and pensions. Some women, I don't know if there are any in this room, are going to be expected to work till at least 67, which is a long way from 40. And only yesterday, something was shared on social media that was giving me the top 133 women working in my industry. And I look through it and I think, there's not a lot there over 40. Maybe, a very small percentage. So what can we do collectively? I think we can all readdress where we are, but what about those people who have to work maybe full-time until they're 67 or older? What can we collectively do to improve? They may be continuing to work full-time in an industry which is changing radically. They're having a lot of the same thoughts we're all having, but they have to work. I just wondered if people had a view on that.
Yes.
And I think it's a good question, and it's one that was put to me when I was working, as I say, with teaching staff who were going through this really, really difficult period of performance management in their 50s because they seemingly couldn't cope, or people were telling me they didn't have the skill set, and I was challenging that every day. It was quite hard work to challenge it every day because I was in the same age group and they were going, well, you would say that. And I was like, this is really bad. Everything that we're having this conversation about is really bad, because what we weren't putting in place was for support, thinking about flexible approaches to the way they worked, thinking about the way that they were retrained, if you like, if they needed to be retrained. The energy that they would bring to work, the wisdom that they would bring to work. We weren't grateful for any of that. We were just saying they're not coping like, and then comparing them to somebody potentially 20 years younger. So for me, that challenge was there, and it was a really gnawing problem in the workplace that I was in. And I then see it everywhere now where I go as well. And I think what we talked about before about the menopause, the generational issue that we have is that the most people in the workplace are women who are going through the menopause because of the generational change in our attitude to going into work when we went into work, which was different to our parents. So there's this whole swathe of people going through the workplace who are in their 50s and having to address potentially some symptoms or symptoms linked to the menopause. So again, the whole swathe of policies, and I know I understand what you were saying about, Emma, about the political agenda, but there's also a corporate agenda around supporting those women because we need them to work because they do a bloody good job when they're there, and we don't want them to be absent from work. So,
but Emma mentioned earlier that a lot of it's financial.
Yeah.
You know, is it not actually? You've done it now. We'd like you to move on, and we can get more energy.
Yeah, and cheaper.
And cheaper.
Yeah.
And all of these other things
Yeah.
from somebody who's 20 years younger.
Yeah. Well, you remember when it changed and we could no longer enforce retirement? Do you remember that big change, probably around the 2008, 2009, when the compulsory age retirement changed and we could no longer retire people? So I'm of a generation that remembers sending letters to people saying, you are reaching the age of your retirement, bye. And, you know, and people go, no, bye, and having a big party. And it doesn't happen like that now in the workplace. And we can't even talk about retirement for fear of discrimination. And that's right, you know. But people do want to change and orientate themselves differently in the workplace so that they can cope with having to work to 67, like you said. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to challenge that and to keep challenging that and keep asking the questions, being forceful in the workplace to say this isn't appropriate. We need to have the right policies, procedures, flexible approaches to enable people to carry on, but also to keep the focus on training and enabling people to see that training is not just for those people who are coming up through the organisation in the younger ages, that we continue to train and that people keep abreast of things. So I think we have a responsibility ourselves to do that, but we also expect the organisation to support that. But it is a challenge, and it is there every day now for people.
It's more of a challenge in smaller
Yeah.
companies, or, you know, I mean, I hope that the larger global companies are taking, you know, all of this on board. But I just think sometimes people work in much smaller environments, and it's maybe not happening.
Yeah.
I'll hand it to Lou in a sec. Yes, of course, in smaller organisations, but also in this university, for example, where despite the fact that after 180 years we have a woman at the helm for the very first time, we still have a management structure that is predominantly male. We still have a diversity festival, which is probably the best in the country at the very least in terms of its commitment and its real agenda and its diversity. And yet most of the sessions are attended by women. And that is a sort of sticking point. That's something we need to address, because we have to bring men into the conversation when it's men that still have quite a lot of the power, frankly.
Yeah, but you know what? If you Google Midlife magazine, the first one in the rank is a midlife magazine for men. So it looks like this topic, it's quite, you know...
rankings are mostly done by men, though. You know, the way that people rank this thing is the people who are sitting and Googling San Francisco are men.
I was actually, sorry, on coronavirus, and you know, it's like the new Brexit, you don't want to mention it, but you have to. There was something on the radio this morning about how the government is changing the Google algorithms so that the first advice you get about it is proper advice. Yes, that's great, I want proper advice, but B, I'm slightly concerned that my government can go into my Google algorithms, whatever they may be, and change them. Sorry, that's a complete footnote.
Yeah, no. But I can see your point.
Algorithms are men, but
I can see your point, but that means also that probably midlife crisis or whatever you want, to consider this stage of life, it's something that probably men more than women feel they are in need to tackle. No, Michael, you are the man, come on.
I'm a token man. Yeah, it's interesting because I've sat on both sides of this, because I used to work in a university as in my previous life as a female, and I was often felt that I was not heard. I had a voice. I used my voice because I'm very forceful and assertive, but I wasn't taken seriously. And that was a massive problem for me. And I do know that there's male privilege now. I have noticed that in the last 6 years since I've transitioned. But I would also say it's not all about men taking control. I think there are men in this world that take control and make women subservient and all those kinds of things, and that's very true, but I don't think all of them are. And I think there's a lot of people that would give support if they understood some of the issues and also if the communication was open. So it's sort of, I sometimes feel from this point of view now that guys get attacked quite a lot. And so I understand why that is, because I've met some of those men that really do need to be attacked and need to be brought up and need to be shown that this is not the right way to talk to people and treat people. But on the other hand, it's not to demonise all men and say, we're different and we don't want you to be part of this, because actually we're all going through the same things. We've got men that are getting to the point in their life where they don't feel as strong physically, which is what to a lot of men means such a big thing. Sometimes they might not be able to support the family because they might be made redundant or anything else like that, or they might become sick and they can't work anymore. And so they're having a lot of trouble as well. It's not just a matter of, it's one set of people. It is all about it's people. We're all,
I would, again, structurally take issue with that, Michael, because if we go to where the real power is, the real power that dictates the markets, that dictates everything about our daily lives, look at the roll call photographs. There's rather cringy photographs of the G7, the G8 and the G20 summits. They look like you, Michael. They don't look like me.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the real power is. And I absolutely hear, of course there are good men. Of course there are. I'm married to one,
Yeah.
But it is still absolutely a man's world, structurally.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think I was part of that system as well. That before I had to stay in my place, and even if I tried to rock the boat and say, well, I want to do this and I want to do that, I wasn't heard and I wasn't taken seriously. So yeah, there is a problem with that, and that's the way we change it. And it's about changing, us all changing it. Yes. And so the men to listen and say, okay, we accept our responsibility of what we've done in the past, and we're not going to accept it any longer. And I think that's the tide is changing with that. But also as well that women step up and say, we're not accepting this anymore, because I always found I was in the minority. If I stood up against those men, there was no one stood next to me. I was very much on my own. So it's getting people to get together and say, right, let's do this together.
And that's another advantage of middle age, I think, is that one feels safer.
Yeah.
Employment law is such that I can rock boats and I'm not going to be out of a job tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's the way that it is, and that's a good thing. And that was not true in my 20s or my 30s. So it's another real positive of middle age, is that boat rocking becomes more feasible.
But you know what? According to all those wonderful ladies that I interview, it looks like usually men experience this midlife crisis. The usual cliche, but they buy, if they can afford, a Porsche, and they start to go out with very young women. Those ladies that I interview in their 50s or their 40s, they do amazing things. Like, for instance, last time in one of our talks, we had Jo Mosley, who is the first woman in her 50 to SUP, stand-up paddleboarding, UK from coast to coast. Or, for instance, we had, Cody Gapar, who, because of her dramatic moment, she'd been affected by cancer. She decided not to give up, and she invented, the first fake eyelashes for chemotherapy patients. So, I mean, but these are just few examples. It looks like women in their midlife, they have like they really, really give themselves a chance to be what they were supposed to be, So, for instance, George Eliot used to say that it's never too late to be what you might have been. And I think that in midlife, this is the right time. And doing my homework, for instance, something that, for me was quite meaningful. For instance, the psychologist Jung, for instance, for him, midlife is a time for personal transformation, when the values of youth are replaced by a different set of values, and when the need to succeed in the world gives place to the desire to participate more in the culture of one's age and to further its development in all kinds of different ways. And that's what I think all of us have experienced. So, yeah, there are differences in the way, middle-aged people experience midlife. Probably you are, very good example, but there are still a huge difference. Probably we are more motivated on, following our gut. I don't know. Any other question?
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things we've talked about is trying to empower younger people by being role models.
Yeah.
I think, too, we need role models for middle-aged people.
Fantastic.
And
who is your middle-aged
well, my role model,
star?
My role model was April Ashley, who some people may remember was one of the first people to transition in the UK from male to female and be in the public eye. And she was dreadfully punished for that. Somebody sold her story to the papers and they outed her as a model, and she never worked again. But she said she was almost more annoyed at the fact the story was sold for £5. And she said, is that all I was worth? £5. But she never gave up. And eventually she was given an MBE for her work in supporting the community. And she's still out there as a figurehead in her 80s. I was privileged to go to her 80th birthday party. And you, as a journalist, can change that tide where too often in the media, middle-aged and older women are ignored. It's all to be about men and younger women. And we need to stop that happening.
Absolutely.
And you can do that in your magazine.
I'm trying to do it. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Any other question?
Thank you so much today for your wisdom and your knowledge. I was just wondering, I take a little bit of umbrage as a slightly younger woman here. I'm 32 and I work in the commercial side of the university, so I'm often in spaces where it's predominantly men in lots of business meetings. And I wonder, there's something wonderful about a gravitas that actually you women have. And is it something that you kind of have to wait for, or I don't know, in spaces I sometimes see women that I would be like, you are of the right age to kind of champion that or to challenge that, some of these structures that happen. And I feel like there are just some boundaries that I have being at the age that I am, but I really kind of look up to you to kind of push some ceilings for me that I'm not yet able to do, but that might be an unfair pressure. But yeah, just kind of, when does that gravitas come, almost?
Well, I think that, those late bloomers are those ones that, because of some circumstances, weren't able to bloom at a young age, or probably because they still didn't know what to do with their life. But if you already know what's your space, take the space, unapologetic. The thing is that you might have, your own ideas. You might have, your future quite clear in your mind. But sometimes it happens that in your 20s or in your 30s, you might have great ideas, but you don't have enough strength or enough support. So that's why there are several late bloomers who become, I don't know, roses or daisies or whatever, later in life. But if you already have this confidence, well, bless you. Take that space. Don't wait so long. Yeah.
I think some of it too is about the fact that in past years, women didn't feel empowered to do these things. I look at some of the young people now and the number of young women who are in really good positions in industry and the media and are out there waving the flag and saying, look at us, we can do it too.
Just when you think about those meetings and there's men in the room and there's other, can you see yourself in that room? Are you okay in that room? Is it mainly men, or is it, how does it represent itself for you?
It's usually a mixture, but there's a lot of old men.
Okay. So if you think about your positioning of that situation and you think about what you say, I would concentrate on how you say it as well. So content, yes, but how you project, how you come across in that room. So the way that you've delivered your question, for example. So, come forward and say what you've got to say, and don't be apologetic about it, I think is what you were saying. And, for you in that room, you have every right to be in that room. You have a validity to be in the room. So, I remember at 30, I was the only female manager in a room full of men, and we used to have an 8 o'clock meeting every morning. And, I used to feel very intimidated when I went into that room every day. They were all older than me. I was there because I was HR, and HR is normally women. And so they would come to me for certain pieces of information, and eventually what I was saying and how I was saying it started to have an impact, because I could make a difference. So have that thought in your head every day, every time you go in that room, what you're going to say, but how are you going to deliver it as well? How are you going to deliver that message?
Yeah.
It's a really weird thing that since I've transitioned, I've realised how much, as when you're growing up as a girl, how much you are influenced. And it's not a written rule, it's not a book someone gives you and says this is how you will behave, but we all seem to be, society seems to have in the past sort of indoctrinated certain characteristics on certain genders when they were growing up. And one of those I find particularly with my female friends is they've always apologised. They always apologise for everything, even when it's not their fault. And it's almost like they have to back down. They feel that they should care for everyone and look out for everyone, and they haven't got the same rights as everyone because they're looking after other people. And there's all sorts of little little things that go on as children that I've noticed now, in that order to keep those roles going. And I think some of that is what we carry on into adulthood. You know, so, you know, the guys are expected to be the tough, strong ones that don't cry and all that, and that's all breaking down, and obviously we know that's not working. You know, we've got a huge suicide rate for men because they're not talking about things, they're just, you know, being so ill. But the same, you know, what we do with children, you look at the way we bring children up and how they become adults. And it's true about what you said about how you say things and about how you present yourself. And, you know, and having that, it's very, very difficult. I've been in those situations to have that self-belief and that confidence to say, well, I know what I'm talking about and you should listen to me. And sometimes it's that forcefulness because men get that as a right. They're given that. They're brought up sometimes to know that they're right and expected to give all the, you know, all the information and have all the knowledge and everything else. But it's not true. And you know, we self-perpetuate that by allowing that to happen. And I think it's about that, you know, standing up and saying, well, actually, I've got an opinion, and my opinion is valid as well. And, you know, my knowledge is as good as your knowledge. And so I think it's about that. And I think if I could go back, like I said before, I didn't want to go back, but if I could go back into that position and tell myself that in those meetings and say, you know, you have the right, you have that knowledge, and to believe in yourself and to stand up against them and say, this might be the norm, this might be what's always happened, but it's not happening from now on. That's the difference.
Thank you. Thank you.
One other thing, I think what you were saying earlier, Emma, about not being enough men in here, and what you said, Vanessa, is that maybe think about the way you deliver. Well, no, women speak differently from men, and we shouldn't be thinking, well, maybe I do apologise, but men have to accept, or other people have to accept, that women are like that, and they do speak softer sometimes. I mean, I know a lot of women who don't, but including myself. But you know, some women do speak more softly. Some people are not perhaps as good, or maybe that's not the right word, but are different in the way they present an idea. And I just think we've all got to get everybody to think that we mustn't all try to be like. I mean, there'll be men who don't speak, who speak more softly, or who are not as good at standing up in a meeting, and they probably feel much the same. They feel they may be 50 and still don't have the gravitas that a bloke they work.
I think what you're talking about there is what I would describe as imposter syndrome. So we all have it. So why are we in this room? What's the room for? What's the space that I'm in here for? What's the message I want to get across in this arena? And I think imposter syndrome is, like you say, it's everybody's got it, men and women. And you're at the moment describing something that sounds like that in terms of, I'm going into this room, how do I get this message across? How do I get gravitas, I think you said, in the room? And I think, you know, I work with men and women around the presentation aspect of life and corporate world and, you know, that sort of thing. But for me, we must stop apologising, because otherwise we'll never be seen as on the same footing, because, like you say, men don't tend to do it.
No.
So we must stop doing. Our language has to change in order to move us forward, and then we can move that.
It's time to wrap up. I'm sorry. It's 5. It's 5 o'clock, and so thank you so much. So the crunchy book we have chosen this time, it's there are no grown-ups. A Midlife Coming-of-Age Stories by Pamela Druckerman, the #1 Sunday Times bestseller. And so thank you so much for being part of this panel, and I really hope to see you soon. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please give us a feedback and spread the good word of this new midlife movement. And you can follow us on social media. There are some details there, or simply follow us on crunchytaste.com. If you want to join our mailing list, please leave your email. It's a way to keep in touch. And there are also some free weebies, how do you call it? Freebies. Okay. Some stickers and some free weebies, yes, okay. And I really hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.